All right, today I wanted to spend a little time and talk about laboratory safety and the instruments and apparatus you'll be using in lab this year. We'll start with the good old safety glasses. This is something that you will put on first thing when you go in lab in classroom. Safety glasses are obviously used to protect your eyes. You want to make sure you have them on at all times. There should be no time you're in the lab when you don't have them on other than when you're putting them up. So safety glasses are very important. First thing we do every time we go in the lab is put them on. Secondly, lab apron. We won't use these all the time this year, but there will be a few labs where we will use them. It's pretty self-explanatory. An apron will simply protect your clothes if you get any chemicals on them, caustic chemicals, chemicals that could burn through your clothes. Again, we will only use them when we have chemicals as such. You won't need to use them every lab. Lab apron. A ring stand is a pretty important chemical apparatus. As you see, it has a nice wide base right here. And that base allows it to hold steady, and it's got a pole that goes up the side, and then the important part is really right here. In essence, that allows us to set a beaker or something on there, and then below, right where this triangle is, we can set a Bunsen burner, which we'll talk about in a second, and we can have a flame go up and heat an object. But a ring stand allows us to keep our hands off it and not worry about it and heat up an object really easily through a Bunsen burner. Notice there's a few other clamps we can use to do that with test tubes as well. All right, a beaker. Beaker is a very straightforward instrument that allows us to very loosely measure liquid. Notice if you look at the lines here, I'll go back. If you look at the lines here, there's only 80, 100, 60, 40, 20 on this 100 milliliter beaker. This is not for precise measuring, right? This is for very general measuring. If I say I need around 60 milliliters, you can use a beaker. But if I need 61 milliliters, you cannot use this beaker. This is for approximation measuring and for transporting liquids. Okay, beaker tongs obviously are used to hold beakers, especially when you're heating them and they're hot. You want to use beaker tongs so you're not going to burn your hands. Very important. The tongs we have in class are these bottom ones that have the rubber on the ends that allow you to grip the beaker better. Erlenmeyer Flask. We used this the first day in class and we'll continue to use this. This is used to place liquids in the bottom. I'm going to use my blue color, right, to mimic some water. So we can put liquid down here, and because of the conical or cone-shaped size of this flask, we can swirl it and it allows us to mix solids and liquids a lot better. Again, not for measuring, because 250, 200, we can't get a precise measurement, but this allows us to mix solids and liquids together and allow those liquids to mix up a little bit more. Safety shower eye wash. Hopefully you never have to use these. We'll talk about these in chemistry. If you get chemicals in your eyes or get chemicals on your head or yourself, you can go over there and rinse off. Important to know where it is in lab. Watch glass. Watch glass is simply a conical convex shape that allows you to put some items on it, something maybe that you are putting a flame to or burning. Maybe if you're evaporating a liquid, you can also turn it upside down and set it on top of a beaker as well. So it is a multi-purpose instrument. The good old Bunsen burner, very, very important. The Bunsen burner allows us to heat things in lab. We'll talk later about how to light it, but one thing I want to mention is the flame. Notice we have here an inner cone right here and an outer cone. We know the hottest part of the flame is the top of that inner cone, and that's what we want to use most of the time. This is how we'll light them. You've seen these lighters before. A lot of times we use a spark type of lighter, but I've found that these are a lot easier to light in class. Stirring rod. This is a glass stirring rod, so it's not conductive. It wouldn't give off a spark or anything. We use this to stir. We do not use a thermometer to stir. We use a glass stirring rod. A scoopula. Scoopula does what it says in the name. It scoops. Notice there is the end right here that we will be scooping from most of the time, and that allows us to transfer solids, chemicals into a beaker or wherever it needs to go. A graduated cylinder. This is what we measure with. Very, very important type of glassware in the chemistry lab. Notice now these lines, this is a 50 milliliter graduated beaker, these lines are a lot closer together. So now I see 30 here, I see 50 here. I can now measure down to the nearest milliliter. This is what we want to measure with, and then pour our liquid into the beaker. Forceps, also called tweezers, used to pick up small things, a solid obviously, and move them someplace. Spatula, a little bit different than your kitchen spatula, but allows us to again pick up small things, flip them over. In essence, if our fingers are bigger, we don't want to touch chemicals either. This allows us to move chemicals around without touching them. A crucible. This is an important instrument that you can heat up things to a very high temperature. You might need to liquefy a solid, so you'd put a solid in a crucible, you'd heat that up on a ring stand, and that crucible can withstand really high temperatures. Crucible tongs is simply what we hold the crucible with. We don't want to touch it with our fingers because we would get burnt. Crucible tongs allow the crucible to be moved around. The good old test tube, probably the most basic instrument of chemistry. Test tubes are simply for mixing liquids, mixing solids and liquids in small amounts. We can move those around a little bit and move the solid and the liquid together and mix them together. Test tube allows us to do that. Test tube holders, what you just saw in the previous one. It's simply, if we've been heating a test tube, it allows us to keep our hands, our fingers off of them. And then a test tube rack, right? A lot of times we'll use a lot of test tubes in a lab. This allows us to have a place to set them so we're not holding them in our hands. Test tube brush. You'll clean test tubes at the end of every lab. You'll need a drop of soap and that test tube brush. Go in and out with some water in there a few times, and that test tube will be clean. Make sure you rinse it out. Well plates. Well plates are, in essence, really small test tubes. They don't hold as much as a test tube, but they do the same sort of thing. We can mix liquids together. We can mix liquids and solids. It just gives us a really small area in which to see, observe, and mix liquids and solids. Hot plate is in essence just a hot plate which you cook food on in an apartment, but we use this in chemistry. At times we don't want to use an open flame Bunsen burner, so we put this on a hot plate. We can get this pretty warm, and we can heat a beaker on this. We can do a lot of things with this hot plate to heat up solids or liquids. And a good old thermometer. We are in chemistry, and everything we do in chemistry is in degrees Celsius. Degrees Celsius. Remember, let's get Fahrenheit out of our mind here. We're dealing with degrees Celsius. So freezing is 0 degrees Celsius, and boiling or melting is 100 degrees Celsius. So get Fahrenheit out of your mind, 32 degrees and all of that. 0 degrees Celsius is freezing, 100 degrees Celsius is melting.